Most true crime stories are filled with heartbreak and tragedy. But sometimes, true crime cases are just downright weird and bizarre. Today, I've put together a list of 5 of the weirdest true crime stories ever told. It's a week before Christmas, and people are doing last-minute Christmas shopping, getting gifts for their family and friends, and planning dinners, parties, all the usual stuff. It's a typical Christmas holiday for everyone. Well, everyone except the Bletch family. The Bletch family was in a Muskegon courtroom for the hearing and sentencing of their daughter's killer. But in the middle of victim impact statements, the killer just stood up, asked to leave, then blew a kiss to the Bletch family as he walked out of the courtroom. The courtroom erupted in fury, with people shouting out names like coward and monster as he walked away. But this was nothing new for him, because the Bletch family wasn't his only set of victims. This man had killed before. Welcome to True Crime Stories. If this is your first time here, I'm your host, Ty Knotts, and I post new true crime documentaries every single week. There's not a bunch of drama and speculation, it's just fact-based true crime. So if that's your thing, be sure to hit that subscribe button. It's free and it just lets you know when I post new videos. Jessica Heeringa, a loving mother of a 3-year-old son, was a gas station worker at Exxon in Norton Shores, Michigan. At the time of the case, Jessica's boyfriend, Dakota Quayle Dyer, had just lost his job, so Jessica was quick to accept any and every possible shift to provide for her family. She had a child to look after, and even though Jessica and Dakota's relationship was anything but perfect, she was adamant about making things work. Jessica had fallen into a deep pit of substance abuse not long before, and she was working her way up to turn her life around. Jessica was defined as a sweet, hard-working young woman who loved her son more than anything. She was a woman who'd made some mistakes, yes, but she was doing her best to rectify them and get things back on track. At Exxon, Jessica usually worked the daytime shift, but at the time of the case, since she was in a tight spot financially, she took up a night shift, where she was supposed to work from the evening to 11 p.m. So on April 26th of 2013, Jessica had a busy day ahead. She got up, went about her morning routine, and then headed for the grocery store to stock up on some things at about 2:44 p.m. 2 hours later, close to 5 p.m., she was at the gas station, donned in her work clothes, ready to start her shift. It was a normal day at the Exxon gas station, people pulling up to fill up on gas and grabbing knickknacks from the store inside. It was a typical boring day, and all was going well until closing time, when someone made a 911 call. It was a customer who called 911, and they seemed very distressed. According to the caller, there was no one inside or outside the gas station. The lights were on, the doors were unlocked, there was a deserted car near the gas pumps, and everything looked eerie. The gas station didn't look like it had been robbed or ransacked. It almost looked like the person working there just stepped out for a bit. But where were they now? They couldn't have gone far because they were still on the clock. The police immediately came to the scene and checked things out. And almost instantly, they found some alarming things. First of all, a woman's jacket, a purse containing close to $400, and cigarettes were left behind. The investigators assumed that it belonged to the gas station worker, who most likely was a woman, judging by the handbag. The police checked the last purchase made by a customer, and it was billed at 10:55 p.m., just a couple of minutes before the 911 call was made, and someone had bought a cigarette lighter. The police also discovered something outside the gas station that made them stop dead in their tracks. Outside, there was a questionable sight of red. The floor of the gas station was dotted with red specks, and it just left everyone feeling dreadful. Moreover, a battery cover off of a laser sight for a firearm was also found. The investigators did suspect robbery, but after seeing the untouched money in the woman's purse and the gas station's cash registers, this was soon ruled out. Something had happened at this gas station, and now an employee had gone missing. After a bit of poking and prodding, the police managed to identify the worker, and it was 25-year-old Jessica Heeringa. She had a night shift at this gas station, and now she was nowhere to be found. This left the investigators with confusion and tons of questions, so they immediately started asking around because, well, the gas station wasn't of much help to begin with. Why? Well, because there were no CCTV cameras that could generate any leads. If that wasn't unsettling enough, then the fact that Jessica, a lone woman, was working a late-night shift at an unsupervised gas station, well, that's everyone's worst nightmare. So the police had very little to go on in this bizarre disappearance. Still, they decided to ask witnesses around for anything out of the ordinary, and they even checked neighboring CCTV cameras for any answers. This was when they found something out. A woman came forward, and she was none other than the manager of the very gas station Jessica worked at. She told the investigators that around 11 p.m., she and her husband were passing by the gas station on their motorcycles when they saw a silver minivan driving to the back of the station. The manager initially thought that was a weird place for a customer's car to go, and her mind went straight to the fact that someone was trying to rob the gas station. This prompted the woman to go a bit further, and when she saw a man getting out of the minivan with the rear hatch opened, she stayed for a bit just to see what was going on. The man drove away after a couple of minutes, and the manager saw nothing alarming to report to the police, so she also drove off. Little did she know that just minutes later, her employee Jessica would go missing. When the police asked what the man looked like, the manager said that he was wearing an orange sweatshirt and had crazy wavy hair. So at that point, the investigators finally had something to go off of: a silver minivan. So they decided to check nearby surveillance cameras for that same vehicle. And within minutes, they'd found another lead. A silver Chrysler Town & Country was seen driving away from the station by 3 different cameras between 11:02 and 11:05 p.m. that night. The investigators also talked to people around the gas station, and one man came forward and said that he saw someone, a man in a silver minivan, talking to Jessica the night she went missing. According to the witness, the man seemed very flirtatious with Jessica, and he was able to describe the man as a man with wavy hair wearing either a red or orange sweatshirt. This was 2 times in a row that a similar description of a man had popped up, who seemed to be the last person with Jessica. What was even more unsettling was an occurrence the night before Jessica's disappearance, though. See, a woman who was a regular customer at the gas station went there again on April 25th around closing time and saw a man close to Jessica. They were in the middle of a conversation, and the woman proceeded to ask Jessica why she was working the night shift alone and that it was dangerous. To this, the mysterious man replied, "She's got her customers looking out for her." This reply left the woman feeling a bit odd, and when she looked over at Jessica, she was shaking her head and seemed as though she may have been scared. This woman's gut told her that something was wrong, and she waited out in her car close to the gas station until she saw Jessica close up and leave safely. She also saw the creepy man leave after this very uncomfortable conversation. The woman also described the man, and it was the same description given by the gas station manager and the other witness. So the police, with the help of witnesses, came up with a composite sketch of the abductor. It was made public, and the police held press conferences and made appeals to the public to come forward with any information on Jessica's abductor and where she might be. But the case soon lost its pace and received no further leads. A mother of a 3-year-old son had gone missing, and no one knew what happened to her. And just like that, Jessica's case went cold for quite some time. But on June 29th of 2014, 14 long months after Jessica's inexplicable disappearance, another woman from Dalton Township, Michigan, was also found lifeless near her home. She was 36-year-old Rebecca Bletch, and she'd been out jogging when she crossed paths with her assailant and was attacked with a firearm. This incident unleashed a wave of terror among the people of Michigan. First, there was Jessica and her disappearance, which was unsolved, and now another woman's life was taken. But the detectives found some shell casings near Rebecca's body, as well as fragments of bullets during her autopsy. The police had no leads in this case either. The police, as well as the community, were getting an eerie sense of deja vu. Like Jessica's disappearance, Rebecca's murder would also go unanswered for about 2 years, and during this time, the perpetrator would strike again. But they say that the 3rd time's the charm. And well, this next incident would prove to be helpful in the police's case. On April 16th of 2016, a young high school girl from Laketown Township got lost after leaving a party late at night. In no time, she was approached by a man in a silver minivan. The man asked if she needed to use his phone to call someone. When the girl said yes, the man asked her to get into his car to make the call. The girl was apprehensive at first, but she eventually complied. And as soon as she sat down in the passenger seat, the mysterious man locked all the doors and subdued the girl with the firearm. The girl was frightened to the core, and she knew that she'd made a terrible mistake getting into this creepy man's car. But her instincts kicked in pretty fast, and she knew that she was going to escape, even if she had to fight this man off of her. As they drove away, the girl asked the man to roll down the windows for some air. This was her only chance of escaping. Miraculously, the girl managed to push herself out of the vehicle from the window, and after a bit of struggling, she was able to make a run for it from the car and its malicious driver. The girl had suffered from minor injuries, but she had successfully managed to escape whatever this guy had planned for her. Luck was on this girl's side, because she was also about to identify the driver of that silver minivan, and she went straight to the police. The man turned out to be Jeffrey Willis, and what was even more chilling was that he'd previously been in jail for homicide. This led the detectives to search Jeffrey's minivan, and inside it, they found a firearm with the laser sight's battery cover missing, and the serial number deliberately scratched off. Not only this, the police also found syringes filled with a clear liquid, which was later found to be a powerful sedative, as well as binds and other weapons. The minivan was essentially a chamber of torment, and it's not hard to guess what Jeffrey could have done to this poor girl if she hadn't run away. If that doesn't send chills down your spine, I don't know what will. The detectives were able to retrieve the serial number for the firearm after a bit of work, and it was traced back to a woman who was coincidentally Jeffrey's coworker. She reported her firearm missing from her home, and interestingly enough, the gun also had a laser, so the pieces started to fall into place. A man with a shady history and a tendency to act violently, and he had the same silver minivan. This couldn't be a mere coincidence. In September of 2016, over 3 years following Jessica's disappearance and 4 years after Rebecca's murder, Jeffrey's house and vehicle were searched after issuing a search warrant. And let's just say that the detectives were in for a surprise because Jeffrey was a walking red flag. On his computer, officers found a lot of violent material about women and children. You can fill in the gaps there yourself. But speaking of the computer, the police also found a very peculiar folder on there as well, and it was named VIX. And besides violent material, there were 2 subfolders named JLH and RSB. It was one hit after another for the detectives because these abbreviations were anything but random. JLH eerily expands to Jessica Lynn Heeringa, and RSB corresponds to Rebecca Sue Bletch. The folders contained pictures of the 2 women and news articles following their disappearance and/or murder. If you needed any more confirmation, then one of Jeffrey's computers was password protected, and the password was J4L27H13. And this was Jessica's initials and the date that she was reported missing, kind of pushed together. In Jeffrey's house, a firearm was also retrieved, and unsurprisingly, the shell casings found near Rebecca's body matched to that exact weapon, so that was another check. Upon gathering all of this evidence from his home and car, Jeffrey was immediately arrested for kidnapping and murdering Jessica Heeringa. He was also subsequently charged with Rebecca's murder, the attempted kidnapping of the high school girl, the very girl who became his eventual downfall, and was also named a suspect in an unsolved murder of a Fruitport High School student that took place in October of 1996. It was later found out that Jeffrey was a frequent visitor at the Exxon gas station where Jessica worked, having visited there about 15 times. So it's assumed that Jeffrey had his nefarious sights set on Jessica, and on the night of April 26th, he acted on his vile plan. Jeffrey's coworkers also later ratted him out after they saw serious scratches and injuries on his arms and face the day after Jessica went missing. Jeffrey's phone records also showed that he was at a remote property 15 minutes away from the gas station at around 11:30 p.m. It turned out that this property belonged to Jeffrey. It was his grandfather's, inherited by Jeffrey after he'd passed away. When the detectives searched the property, they didn't find Jessica, but they did find something. At the property, detectives managed to find bleach and other cleaning supplies, which had likely been used to clean up a crime scene. Now, with all of this evidence now brought in for testing, it was time. Time to send this man to trial and do their best to lock him up for what he had done to these young women. The trial for Jessica's murder was held in May of 2018, even though her body hadn't been found. It was one of those cases in which the evidence was just so incriminating that the prosecution was confident to convict Jeffrey without a body. The prosecution presented heaps upon heaps of evidence, from the material found on Jeffrey's computers to the firearms, witness testimonies, and everything in between. The prosecution believed that Jeffrey had been looking for the perfect opportunity to target Jessica, and on the night of April 26th, he lured Jessica into his van, even injuring her in the process, and then sped out of the gas station parking lot. It's believed that he repeatedly assaulted Jessica while simultaneously taking advantage of her. Once he was done, he took her life, and the prosecution stated that Jessica most likely fought for her life in a severe way, injuring Jeffrey in the process, but she couldn't save herself in the end. Afterward, it's believed that he buried her and carried on with his life like nothing even happened. In the end, a month after the trial, the jury deliberated for about 90 minutes before sentencing a guilty Jeffrey to life in prison with no possibility of parole. As for Rebecca's murder, he was also given the same sentence in December of 2017. But even though Jeffrey was behind bars, there was still one big piece missing in this case. Jessica hadn't been found. Now, everyone was certain that Jeffrey had taken Jessica's life and she was no longer alive, but the family still wanted her body or her remains to be found to give her a proper burial. The Heeringa family needed closure. Well, that's when the plot thickened even more, and Jeffrey's cousin entered the picture. See, in 2016, Kevin Blum, Jeffrey's cousin and former Michigan Department of Corrections prison guard, was charged with lying to the police. He knew a lot of details about Jessica's murder that weren't public information. He initially pleaded guilty to the charges, but later changed his plea to no contest, to being an accessory after the fact. Basically, Kevin divulged that even though Jeffrey was the one who took Jessica's life, it was Kevin who helped him out with disposing of the body. Kevin confessed that Jeffrey had called him the day after Jessica disappeared, asking him to come over for a party. When Kevin arrived, he didn't see a party anywhere. Rather, he saw an unconscious, disrobed, and bound Jessica on the floor with a serious head injury. According to Kevin, he and Jeffrey wrapped Jessica's body in a sheet and loaded her up in his car. The men made their way to a remote area on Sheridan Road near Laketon Road, where Jeffrey, being the calculated and meticulous monster that he was, had already dug a hole for Jessica. The two then buried Jessica's body, dusted their hands off, and rode off into the night. Jeffrey is just a class act. Not only is this man just disgusting and gross, but he is a vile, heartless soul with no regard for anyone but himself. When you go to a court session to hear the conviction of a killer, more often than not, the families of the victims are allowed to give impact statements. This is a way for the family's grievances to be heard, and it's a healing measure for both the family and, hopefully, the criminal. In some instances, once the criminals hear just how badly their actions have affected others, it does help them see the error of their ways and turn their life around. This wasn't true for Jeffrey. Following Jeffrey's sentencing, this man dared to stand up and walk out of the courtroom while Rebecca's family was in the middle of reading their statements. I didn't know if this was even allowed, but the judge let it happen. And if that wasn't enough, Jeffrey still blatantly denied having any involvement in Jessica's disappearance, and even blew the family a kiss as he walked out of the courtroom. In light of Jessica and Rebecca's cases, the families fought hard for justice and change. Following Rebecca's trial and Jeffrey's walk of detachment, her family petitioned for the passing of a law known as Rebecca Bletch's Law. This requires the defendants to sit through the victim impact statements and listen to every single painful and emotional word. The bill was passed by the Michigan Senate on May 10th of 2018, and Rick Snyder, then governor of Michigan, signed it into law on May 24th of 2018. As for Jessica's loved ones, they were appalled at the fact that the establishment she worked at, a busy and reputable gas station, didn't have any security cameras on its premises. They were also angry at the fact that Jessica was the only one working the night shift, which is a pretty scary time for a vulnerable woman to be working in a public place. They sternly believed that whatever happened to Jessica could have been prevented if only someone was there with her. Jeffrey wouldn't have preyed on a young and vulnerable woman if she wasn't alone. This was quite literally and tragically the perfect striking opportunity for a violent predator like Jeffrey. Because of this, Jessica's family made continued efforts to pass a bill known as the Jessica Heeringa Act. The bill was passed on December 9, 2013, requested by Jessica's parents, community members, and a handful of other Michigan legislature members. The bill required gas stations, convenience stores, and 24/7 service stores to have a working and secured surveillance system. Additionally, all stores and gas stations operable till late in the night were required to have at least 2 staff members on shift. The purpose of this bill was to protect and look after shift workers, who are mostly either high school students, women, or college students. But 12 years after the passing of this bill, it still hasn't made its way into Michigan legislature officially. Now, this probably sounds completely insane, but it all boils down to cost. Lawmakers feel that it's too much of a burden to ask a small business to pay 2 employees at a low traffic hour, as well as ask them to pay to install expensive security systems. The thing is, I get it. Some places can't afford it. But this is people's lives we're talking about, not money. If you can't afford it, don't stay open that late. It's simple. But no, they'd rather risk even more lives than risk their money. This is America at its finest. As for Jessica's body, Jeffrey did not say a single word about it. Even though he's nowhere near freedom and will pay for his actions behind bars for the rest of his life, he's still gatekeeping this information. Whether it's his way of having power over the victim's family, or if it's a sick and twisted way of getting pleasure out of someone's misery, I'm not sure. Jessica's parents and loved ones just want her back home, because without Jessica, there is no justice. Jessica's boyfriend and their son Zevin miss her terribly. But in 2014, Dakota, Jessica's boyfriend and the father of their child, was arrested on drug charges, which caused Jessica's sister Samantha to file for emergency custody of Zevin. But as of present, we don't know what ever happened with this situation or where Zevin ended up. At this point, Zevin is likely already 18, or he's close to it. And I just hope everything worked out okay for him. This young man lost everything in his life. First his mother, then his father. And for what? Tim Woody left his teenage sister Kacie at home while he headed off to the college library to do some research. The whole while, Kacie stayed at home on her computer, chatting away with her friends on Yahoo Messenger, and time passed by in the blink of an eye. Tim got home at about 10 p.m., but as he opened the front door, he was met by eerie silence. Normally he'd hear Kacie typing or giggling in the next room over, but not this time. The silence was so heavy, you could feel it. Tim looked around the house, wondering if Kacie may have headed off to bed early, but she hadn't. And Tim quickly realized the house was completely empty. The computer was on, but Kacie was nowhere to be found. As Tim started looking around, he found Casey's glasses tossed onto the floor, completely smashed. As if things weren't unsettling already, the family dog soon came running in. But running is an overstatement. The poor dog could hardly walk. It was limping in pain and whimpering, as if it was trying to tell Tim that something terrible had happened. But Tim already knew. But what he didn't know was where was his sister. Welcome to True Crime Stories. If you're new here, I'm your host, Ty Knotts, and I post new true crime documentaries every single week, narrated by a real human person. So if that's your kind of thing, be sure to hit that subscribe button to keep up to date with all my future cases. Kacie Woody was born in Little Rock, Arkansas, to parents Rick and Christy Woody. She had 2 older brothers, Austin and Tim. Growing up, Kacie was defined as a kind and caring girl who loved poetry, singing, and dancing. She also loved to play the saxophone. She loved animals too, as do most people, but there was one type of animal Kacie didn't like: horses. It turned out there was a story behind her dislike of horses. In June of 1997, when Kacie was just 7 years old, her family got into a car accident. They were en route to Tim's baseball game when a bunch of horses were set loose on the road, and it caused Rick, her father, to swerve. As a result of that, they collided with an oncoming horse, and Kacie's mom, Christy, tragically lost her life right then and there. Rick also suffered from a lot of injuries, but luckily he pulled through. Ever since her mom's passing, Kacie jumped into poetry and would dedicate countless poems to her mom. The memory of this left Kacie with a serious distaste for horses, but that tragedy didn't fade her shine forever. At the time of the case, Kacie, Rick, Tim, Austin, and Tim's friend Eric all lived in a house in Holland, Arkansas, whereas Kacie's aunt, Teresa, was the Woody's family's next-door neighbor, helping take up that motherly gap that Christy had so tragically left behind. Funny enough, the Woody family lived in a heavily wooded area in Arkansas, and even though Kacie was still too young to use the internet unsupervised, Her dad allowed her to use instant messaging on the family's computer. See, where they lived, outgoing calls were billed as long distance, which meant that the Woody phone bill was often incredibly expensive. This was why the family often kept in touch through instant messages to update each other. Kacie had an account on Yahoo Messenger by the name of Model Behavior 36. She would regularly chat with her family and friends on Yahoo, and she also registered on several Christian chat rooms to find friends because she thought it was safer. Somewhere between 2001 and 2002, it's assumed that Kacie stumbled across another user on Yahoo by the name of Dave Fagan. His username on Yahoo was JazzmanDF, and he was a young boy from California who loved surfing. Well, as soon as Kacie and Dave exchanged messages, they developed an online friendship. Dave seemed normal, and he and Kacie shared a lot of the same interests. Kacie eventually began to open up about her personal life, and even told Dave about her mom's passing and how it had affected her. Dave also shared a great deal of personal details, including his aunt, who lived in Arkansas, and her failing health. The two talked for a long time, for many months, and even though Dave sounded a bit too old for Kacie, saying he'd be turning 18 soon, their friendship continued to grow. Before anyone knew it, young Kacie would find herself in her first real relationship. But everything was not what it seemed. Kacie ended up introducing her best friends, Samantha and Jessica, to Dave, and they added each other to their buddy list. For any of you guys that may either be too young to have experienced Yahoo Messenger or maybe too old to have ever cared about it in the first place, Yahoo Messenger was basically the same thing as texting these days, but everything took place on a computer. The best part about the internet in the 90s and early 2000s was that when you were done, you could turn it off and walk away. But these days, it follows you wherever you go. Some people say this is progress, but I'm not personally sure. But anyway, you'd be able to compile a friends list of people where you could just click their name and immediately start up a conversation, assuming that they were at their desk. Dave made his way onto the friend list of Kacie and several of her friends. Well, Jessica and Sam, two of those friends, were pretty protective of Kacie. They tried warning her to not be so open and honest with people that she'd never seen in person before, and falling in love with them or starting a relationship should be a no-go. Samantha and Jessica were scared that someone might take advantage of Kacie's naivety. At that point, they even stressed that strangers on Yahoo could be, quote, 80-year-old grandpas wanting to lure young children into their traps. Kacie took note of this warning, but she didn't stop talking to Dave. Since Kacie's dad, Rick, worked as a police officer, he was out on shifts most of the time and wasn't home to monitor his daughter's internet activity. And even though he knew that Kacie was talking to boys on the computer, he thought that as long as Kacie was at home and the boys were elsewhere, Kacie would be safe from any sort of danger. Kacie's brothers were also in college, so they would usually be on campus attending classes. But there was still Kacie's aunt, Teresa, who lived next door, so Kacie's family was at ease knowing at least she wasn't completely alone. Well, in the summer of 2002, Rick found out that Dave was turning 18, and since Kacie was still very young, he prohibited her from talking to Dave. Kacie obviously rebelled, and somehow she and Dave started talking on the phone. Well, in the autumn of 2002, something strange happened in the Woody household. See, Kacie and her best friend Jessica were spending the night at her place when all of a sudden, the girls started hearing strange noises coming from downstairs as well as outside of the house. They heard the wooden floorboards creaking as if someone was downstairs, but no one was at home besides the girls, at least as far as they knew and hoped. Kacie and Jessica were scared to the bone and barricaded themselves in Kacie's bedroom. Kacie didn't have a landline near her to call her dad or the police, so she reached out to none other than Dave and told him that someone was in their house. Dave, in an attempt to try and calm Kacie down, told her not to worry and that no one was likely in the house. And suddenly, as if Dave's words were magic, the noises stopped completely. This event left Kacie pretty shaken up, but she didn't stop talking to Dave. And actually, Kacie would soon make another online friend right after this incident. In October of 2002, Kacie met another boy on Yahoo Messenger, and he was a 14-year-old boy named Scott. His username was Taz2999, and he was from Alpharetta, Georgia. He loved football and wrestling, and his profile picture was of a teen boy wearing a football uniform. At some point, Scott and Kacie began dating. and this turned into a very confusing situation between Kacie, Dave, and Scott. When Dave found out about Kacie dating Scott, he wasn't angry or betrayed per se. He just requested to remain friends with Kacie because he needed someone to talk to about his aunt. And since Kacie connected with him on a sympathetic and personal level, she agreed to keep in touch. But Kacie didn't heed her friend's warning about not giving personal information to online strangers, and she ended up sharing her home address with Scott. One day, Samantha and Jessica were shocked to find Scott's physical picture, the same picture he had on Yahoo, inside Kacie's locker. They confronted Kacie about this, and she admitted that she'd given her home address to Scott, and he presumably mailed her this photo. Now, I know Kacie is young, and this was back in 2002, but trusting a practical stranger online and giving him her home address was certainly a mistake on Kacie's part, and she certainly knew this, but her love for Scott was overwhelming, and so she tossed caution to the wind and convinced herself that her friends were just being overprotective. This led Samantha to reach out to the school's counselor and unfold the entire scene of Kacie interacting with strangers online and giving out her home address and phone number to these people. Kacie was immediately called into the office and given a crash course on internet safety. This led to a brief argument between Kacie and Samantha, but they eventually made up, and Kacie proceeded to invite Samantha to a sleepover soon after. Samantha actually declined because it was a weekday and she had some things to do. Kacie then asked Jessica, but she was also busy and couldn't make it. Jessica and Samantha did find it weird that Kacie was suggesting a sleepover on a school night. Their gut told them something was up, and their guts were right. On the evening of December 3rd, 2002, Kacie was home alone. Even though Kacie was usually alone since her dad and brothers were out and about, her aunt was right next door and would keep an eye on her. But this time around, Kacie's aunt, Teresa, was also out in Conway for her daughter's baseball game. So Kacie was truly all alone in her home. Computer and landline records showed that Kacie was talking to her online boyfriend, Scott, on Yahoo, whereas she was also in contact with Dave on the phone. At around 9:41 p.m., Scott noticed that Kacie had stopped replying to his messages. The chat room was open, but Kacie was not answering any of her messages. Scott really got worried, and he called the home landline, as well as contacted Kacie's friend, Jessica, via email, but to no avail. Kacie was out of nowhere just ghosting him. A while later, Kacie's brother, Tim, and his friend Eric arrived home, and while Eric assumed that Kacie had just gone to bed and didn't think much of it, Tim was immediately alert when he saw a couple of things. First, Kacie's reading glasses were damaged, and a lens was missing as if someone had smashed it. The computer was open but unattended, and the chat room with Scott was still open. And the most alarming part was the fact that the family dog, a Yorkshire Terrier, was limping and whimpering. Tim immediately called his dad Rick, and the detectives were quickly involved once Kacie's friends didn't hear anything from her either. The detectives initially thought that Kacie was a runaway, but Rick was quick to rebuff those claims. He told them that he and Kacie had actually talked a few hours before she went missing at about 7 p.m., and Kacie was practicing her saxophone. Moreover, Kacie's clothes, thick coats and shoes were all left behind. So if Kacie wanted to run away, she would have taken at least some warm clothing with her, because at night the temperatures were ruthlessly cold. Soon, the FBI joined the missing person investigation too, and the investigators talked to everyone, Kacie's friends, schoolmates, and even teachers. They wanted to find any clues that could have explained Kacie's disappearance. That's when they got to know about Kacie's online relationships with Scott and Dave, two practical strangers. The detectives were immediately on high alert. They thought that either Scott or Dave had something to do with Kacie's disappearance. First, they were able to track down Scott through his computer activity, and sure enough, he wasn't lying. He was in Georgia, and after a lengthy crackdown, the FBI was able to confirm that Scott was indeed 14 years old, and he wasn't lying to Kacie. So he couldn't have been a threat to her, even though he knew where Kacie lived. So the next person they needed to talk to was this Dave guy, and after going through his and Kacie's chats, they found something out. Dave was actually on his way from California to Arkansas to see his ailing aunt one last time, because she wasn't going to last long. This was taking place sometime right before Kacie went missing. The investigators were highly suspicious of Dave and his sudden trip to Arkansas, and things weren't adding up. The detectives launched a search around the area where they thought Dave was staying, and they were able to pinpoint the location to a motel in Conway at a Motel 6, where a man with a 1993 Buick Regal and a California license plate had arrived a day before Kacie went missing. This man was 47-year-old David Fuller. He'd booked a week's stay in the motel and was complaining non-stop about the internet not working properly. The police then went to the Conway Enterprise rent-a-car from where David recently rented a silver Dodge Caravan minivan, and the employees remembered David being on edge. He was constantly taking smoke breaks while completing the paperwork, and he was just acting oddly. The detectives were later able to get a hold of Dave's contact number, and lo and behold, it was the same number used to contact Kacie on the landline. So the investigators were sure of one thing. There was no 18-year-old Dave Fagan. It was actually 47-year-old David Fuller, pretending to be a teenager, and he was grooming Kacie. But now, she was gone, and Dave was the prime suspect in her disappearance. David Leslie Fuller belonged to a Mormon family of 6. Born in Salt Lake City, Utah, David married a woman at the age of 19 but got divorced shortly after. He then married a woman named Sally in the 80s, and sometime later, she gave birth to 2 children, a son and a daughter, 4 years apart. David started out his work life as a Navy Seabee in 1989, but he left the Navy in 1999 when the family of 4 moved to La Mesa. This was the time when David began to display anger problems and mood swings. He would also subject Sally to abuse, and at one point, Sally caught David spending long hours of the day on the internet, taking late-night walks and talking to someone on the phone. In 2002, Sally and David were considering getting a divorce, and it's safe to say that David was not happy at all. The couple eventually separated, and David just got worse from this point on. He got arrested and charged with spousal abuse when he charged into Sally's home, threatened her, and used force to subdue her, and even managed to attack Sally with a screwdriver, despite the fact that she'd barricaded herself in a bedroom of her home. After all this blew over, David ended up getting a job at a used car dealership, but instead of working, he spent his time on his work computer, watching inappropriate content involving children. It's pretty clear to see at this point, Dave had a serious problem. With all of this information, in search of Kacie, the police focused their attention on a storage unit David had rented. See, David's credit card notified the detectives that he was renting a storage unit at GuardSmart. So the investigators made a beeline for the storage unit, hoping to catch David red-handed and hopefully find Kacie alive and well. But little did they know, they were about to get a lot more than they bargained for. A day following Kacie's disappearance, on December 4th, 2002, Little Rock police arrived at the storage unit at GuardSmart at around 6 p.m. The door was closed, but it was unlocked, so the detectives pulled the rolling door up. And when they did, 2 things happened at once. First, the police saw the silver Dodge Caravan parked inside the storage unit facing the investigators, and then a second later, a single pop rang through the tense and eerie storage space. Someone had fired a round inside. The officers ran for cover and called for backup, all the while commanding whoever was inside to surrender and come out of the unit. But there was no answer or movement inside that storage unit. Still, the detectives didn't move a muscle, and they waited for SWAT teams to arrive. Finally, over 2 hours later, at around 8:30 p.m., the police and SWAT teams entered the storage unit. But what they saw before them likely haunts them to this day. On the ground, by the still running minivan, lay 47-year-old David Fuller, with a single wound to his head. Clutched in his hand was a 9mm firearm. Next, the detectives went around the minivan, and when they reached the back, they saw something. It was light and pale. They weren't sure what it was, but they soon found out in the back of the van, chained to the corners of the van floor, lay the lifeless body of Kacie Woody. David took her life with that same firearm he'd used on himself, and horrifically, David had done much more to her before her life was taken. This was far, far too much for the detectives to handle. This scene was very, very bad. Next to Kacie's head was a bottle of chloroform and a dirty rag. The investigators suspect that this was how David managed to knock Kacie out and abduct her from her home in Holland, Arkansas. Kacie had been found, but the bigger problem was her life had already been ended, and the killer wouldn't even face the consequences of his actions. Following the discovery of Kacie's body and David's irreversible actions, the FBI got a search warrant for David's apartment, and when they searched the place, it was worse than they had feared. Right by David's computer, there was a collage of Kacie's pictures and a piece of paper that had Kacie, her friends, and their numbers and home addresses on it. It's just so terrifying to think how meticulous this monster was. He planned everything to a T. Investigators also found a poem written by Kacie for her mom in David's possession. Further digging showed that David used his David Fagan persona to not only groom Kacie, but 3 other girls in the past, too. It started in the winter of 2000, when he reached out to a girl in Michigan under the alias Dave Fagan and offered to buy her a plane ticket to California. Thankfully, the girl refused. Otherwise, can you imagine what could have gone down if the poor girl went to California to meet Dave? Next, 2 years after the fact, he targeted a girl in Dallas, Texas, and asked for her home address to send her some flowers. But this plan failed too, because the girl was smart and she never gave her address to him. Kacie, unfortunately, was not so streetwise, and she fell into David's catfishing trap, and it cost her her life. Kacie just wanted a friend, but what she got instead was David Fuller. The investigators also found out this wasn't the first time David had visited Arkansas. After meeting Kacie on Yahoo, he traveled to Arkansas 3 times in the fall of 2002. He arrived at Clinton National Airport, rented a car, and went to a Motel 6 in Conway, and it's alleged that he spied on Kacie during his stay there. This can't be confirmed, though, because David isn't here to speak for himself, but I don't think anyone would be shocked if this was eventually proven to be true. The detectives soon learned that the firearm he used on Kacie and himself was purchased in November of 2002. He told his kids that he was getting a firearm for target practice, which was obviously a lie. He also went to GuardSmart and looked at a large storage unit before renting one, the same one he and Kacie would soon be found in. This was oddly around the same time when Kacie and Jessica heard the mysterious intruders inside her home. Looking back, Jessica and Samantha believed that the intruder was David, but he was unable to carry out his plans, maybe because he knew Kacie wasn't alone or for some other reason. It's also believed he was scoping the area before he put his plans into motion, which is just chilling to think about. This man had successfully made his way into the home of these 3 teenage girls, and he did so largely undetected until the floor creaked, that is. When David returned to California, he bought chains, zip ties, and tape from his local Home Depot, and even got his hands on chloroform from a chemical supply company. In December, he decided to put his plans into action, and when he found out that Kacie would be home alone, he drove from California to Arkansas in his Buick Regal, and he told Kacie he was coming to see his aunt. But spoiler alert, there was no aunt. This was David's sick and twisted way of gaining Kacie's trust. Kacie's funeral was held on December 9th, 6 days after she'd gone missing. She was laid to rest right next to her mother, Christy, in South Crossroads Church Cemetery in Rosebud, Arkansas. Soon after all this unfolded, Kacie's family founded a nonprofit organization called the Kacie Woody Foundation. And the idea behind it was to warn children about internet safety and help them to not fall into the same trap that Kacie did. Rick was so devastated and riddled with guilt that he couldn't protect his daughter from a predator. He thought that as long as Kacie was home, she was safe. But he lost his daughter in the worst way, and still thinks about the what-ifs and whether things could have turned out differently. Kacie's case is quite possibly the first thoroughly documented case of a predator using the internet to groom, abduct, and murder a teen. And it was an equally devastating one. The internet has made things more convenient, no doubt. But crossing over to the dark side of the World Wide Web and how predators and monsters are sitting on the other side of the screen, waiting to pounce on unsuspecting victims, it's a scary thought. These days, predators are more prevalent than ever, far more so than when this unfolded back in 2002. The thing I miss the most about the early days of the internet is that when you were done with it, you just turn it off and leave it where it was. If you found out your kids are using the internet irresponsibly, you could just take it away. These days, that's much more complicated, and in some situations, it's impossible. The main thing we all need to remember is that when you give a young kid or a teen a cell phone, a tablet, a laptop, a computer, whatever it is, you're not just giving your kid access to the internet. You're giving the internet access to your kid. Loretta Saunders had just found out she was pregnant, and she was over the moon. Her boyfriend was equally excited. But just as the two were beginning preparations for the new baby, Loretta stopped responding to texts and calls. Her boyfriend was beyond confused. This just didn't make any sense. Maybe Loretta just needed some space to breathe and time to think. But before long, 3 full days had passed by with no word, not a single text. But then out of the blue, a message popped up into his phone. And it was from Loretta, but she didn't sound like herself. She was asking her boyfriend what her mother's maiden name was, claiming she'd suddenly forgotten. But what an oddly specific thing to forget, and why now of all times? Something was wrong, but it wouldn't be until 2 weeks later when Loretta would finally be found, after she'd been murdered. Welcome to True Crime Stories. If you're new here, I'm your host, Ty Knotts, and I post new true crime documentaries every single week. So if you love classic true crime without a bunch of AI garbage, you've come to the right place. So be sure to hit that subscribe button to keep up to date with all of my future videos. It's 100% free. Loretta Saunders was born in Happy Valley Goose Bay, Newfoundland and Labrador, which is in Canada. Her parents, Miriam and Clayton, had children from previous relationships, and Loretta was actually the 5th biological child of the family of 7. The Saunders family was very big. Aside from Loretta's step-siblings, the Saunders household also became home to several Aboriginal children. See, Miriam and Clayton were passionate about fostering children, and they opened their doors to children in need in the community. So the house was always full of people, but Loretta loved every second of it. But while Loretta had a pretty happy upbringing, everything in her life was not sunshine and roses. See, when Loretta was in school, it was alleged that she'd been a victim of both physical and sexual abuse, and this had severe effects on Loretta's mental health. She moved from her hometown to Montreal at a pretty young age, and this abrupt change only caused even more problems for her. We don't know if it was spurred by the sudden move, or if it was more so the abuse she'd been victim to, but soon, Loretta fell into a serious hole of depression. But she was not about to give up her life because of one little hiccup. Despite this incredible setback at such a young age, Loretta pushed herself, finished high school, and was accepted into St. Mary's University in Halifax. There, Loretta studied criminology and dreamed of becoming a lawyer. Being an Indigenous woman herself, Loretta knew that she wanted to dedicate her thesis to missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls in Canada. She wanted to spread the word about this, which was more than just a thesis topic. Loretta herself had been through many ups and downs in her own life for being Indigenous, and she made it her life mission to bring the misfortunes of Indigenous women and girls to light. She wanted to make a change, and she dedicated her life to making the lives of others better. Loretta was also in a relationship with a man named Yalçın, who was originally from Turkey. They'd been together for almost 3 years, and at the time of the case, Loretta got that unexpected yet wonderful surprise. She was pregnant with Yalçın's child. Rather than be terrified by this news, both Loretta and Yalçın were beyond excited. While this would obviously be a pretty massive change for them both, neither one saw this as anything but a blessing. Now, since Loretta and Yalçın were living together, Loretta's apartment was empty and no one was using it. Now, this may sound like an odd thing to mention, but the thing is, around this same time, Loretta had found out that the university would not approve her honors thesis topic of the missing and endangered women. This threw a kink in her plans, as they were now withholding funding for her research. But desperate to prove her point and let her fellow Indigenous women's voices be heard, Loretta made a new plan. She decided to rent out her empty apartment and use the money to fund the research into her thesis project. So she found a couple to rent her apartment to, and that was that. Things were going great until they weren't. February 14th of 2014 rolled around, and it was Valentine's Day. Yalçın and Loretta planned to spend most of the day together, but there was one problem. Loretta had up and vanished, and now she wasn't answering her phone. Yalçın tried calling her, texting her, and leaving her voicemails, but everything went unread, and there was no response. Yalçın had no choice but to call Loretta's sister Delilah and ask her if she'd seen Loretta around. During this time, Yalçın received a very odd message, and it was from Loretta. Well, sort of. It came from Loretta's phone number, but The message sounded odd, and it didn't sound like something Loretta would do or say. The text read, quote, "I'm so stressed that I can't even remember my own mother's maiden name." The thing is, Loretta and her mother were very close. She knew good and well what her mother's maiden name was, and this was not something she would just forget. Other texts also showed that Loretta had somehow locked herself out of all of her online banking apps. Now this seemed really weird to Yalchin. Loretta wasn't the type of person to forget important things like this. She was a responsible young woman who didn't usually forget her bank passwords and stuff like that. Another text said that Loretta was out meeting an unnamed friend. And again, Yalchin thought that these texts were bizarre because Loretta would always tell everyone where she was going and who she was with. Loretta's family also tried to contact her, but to no avail. No one had seen her, and if you remember, she was also pregnant. She could be in danger and might need help for all anyone knew, and finally, after 3 long days of not hearing from her, 26-year-old Loretta Saunders was reported missing. Her car, a 2000 Toyota Celica, was also nowhere to be seen. So this was what the police started their search with. The investigators wanted to find the last place Loretta could have gone to, and they would start their investigation from there. Luckily, they didn't have to look for too long. It turned out that Loretta had an important errand to run on the day that she went radio silent. She was due to make a trip to her apartments to pay a visit to her tenants because they hadn't paid their rent yet. The detectives were interested in this piece of information, but before they made their way to Loretta's apartment, they asked Yalchin some questions. According to Yalchin, Loretta had a busy day on Friday, February 13th, and the first order of business was to go to her apartment to collect the rent from her tenants, Blake Leggett and Victoria Henberry. Eerily enough, she wasn't seen or heard from after making her way to the apartment. So this immediately put the investigators on edge, and they decided to go to Loretta's apartment in Halifax. When the police knocked on the apartment door, they were expecting the tenants to open it, but strangely enough, no one was home. When the officers gained access to the apartment, what stood out to them the most, beside the apartment being quite clean and tidy, was that it was eerily quiet. Nothing was out of place to suggest that a struggle had taken place, and when the investigators asked around, they got to know the reason behind the tenant's absence. The couple claimed to be away for Valentine's break, and no one had seen them since. The next step for the detectives was to check the CCTV cameras, and luckily there was one camera at the entrance of the apartment building. The interesting thing about it was that the camera caught anyone and everyone who walked in and out of the apartment through the main entrance. This was the only point of entry and exit for people living in the apartment, so movements were always caught by surveillance cameras. So that was what the investigators did, along with checking the rest of the cameras and back exits too. They wanted to see when Loretta got to the apartment complex and if she ever made it out or not. They went through the surveillance footage of the day when Loretta visited the tenants, and sure enough, she was seen entering the apartment complex a little before 11 a.m. on Friday the 13th. But hours had gone by, and police sifted through footage after footage, but they didn't ever see Loretta leaving, not from the main entrance and not from any of the other places. This was quite alarming. Loretta did enter the apartment, but she was never seen leaving. So the investigators were certain that something happened in that apartment that prevented Loretta from leaving. At least, not alive. While going through the footage, the detectives managed to see someone leaving the apartment complex, not once, but several times. It was not Loretta, but her tenants, and what the police saw in their hands filled them with dread. See, on the day that Loretta went missing, around 2:30 p.m., Victoria and Blake were seen exiting the elevator carrying a large bag with them. It looked like a hockey bag, and the man Blake was having a hard time carrying it. Once he took the bag outside, presumably to his car, he was seen walking back in and going back up to the apartment. This time, at around 3 p.m., Blake was seen again, and again with more bags. Then he went up again, and this was the last time he made the trip from their apartment to the parking lot. And this time he came down and he was with Victoria. But still, there was no sign of Loretta. So the investigators had this very terrifying inkling that Loretta did go to the apartment, but sadly, she may have never left. But the big question still remained, why? Why would two strangers attack Loretta? And more importantly, where was this mysterious bag now? To find answers, the detectives needed to track down Loretta's tenants. Luckily, the investigators were able to figure out that Loretta's cards were still active, and lo and behold, there was activity on them. The police found out that Loretta's cards had been used at a store at around 5 p.m. on February the 13th, the same day Loretta went missing. When the investigators reviewed the footage from the store, they found Loretta's Toyota parked outside the store. And when they reviewed the footage from the store exit, they saw none other than Victoria, one of the tenants, leaving the store with her purchased goods. Next, the detectives traced the car's movement to a local Tim Hortons, which was about 10 miles from Loretta's apartment. The cameras inside and outside the drive-thru were able to identify Victoria wearing the same blue jacket as in the camera footage in the apartment and the store. The cameras inside the drive-thru, where the cashier was, also saw a bald man in the driver's seat, and he was identified as Blake. So Victoria and Blake were clearly using Loretta's car and her cards to buy snacks and coffee, and Loretta was still nowhere to be seen. If you add the eerie footage of Blake carrying a bunch of heavy bags from the apartment, then I think you can guess where this was going. The Halifax Police Department immediately reported Loretta's car as stolen, and they were waiting for the tenant's next move. Well, within 5 days, on February 18th, the Halifax police were contacted by the Harrow Police Department, and they had some good news for them. The Harrow PD was able to track down Loretta's stolen car, and it was currently at a house in Harrow, Ontario. This was enough reason to arrest Victoria and Blake, and that was exactly what was done. Now, the Halifax police needed answers, and they needed them fast, because it had been days since anyone had heard from Loretta. And if they were going to bring her home alive, they needed to act quickly. As the couple was arrested and in custody, the investigators found some interesting information on Blake and Victoria. They both had run-ins with the law. Blake was due to appear in court in Calgary for unrelated charges, while Victoria was reported for threatening someone in Halifax. So you can already tell they're not star citizens. But anyway, the detectives first searched Victoria and Blake, and they found Loretta's phone and bank cards in the possession of the couple. This only heightened the police suspicion even more. The investigators questioned Blake and Victoria, but their lips were sealed. They maintained that they didn't know where Loretta was, and they hadn't seen her for days. When asked about how they managed to get a hold of Loretta's car, Blake admitted that Loretta had sold it to him. But this didn't make any sense. Loretta used her car to go to university and run errands. She had no plans of selling the car. Even Loretta's boyfriend, Yalchin, was dumbfounded when he heard this. Everyone knew Blake was lying. Well, since the couple was being uncooperative, the police had no choice but to look through Blake's phone, and that was when they found something in the gallery. It was a video, recorded a couple days before Loretta went missing, and when the investigators played it, they were gobsmacked.
This is why Victoria should not drink.
You really think I don't want to be with you?
When I'm sober?
And if you stupid?
Why? What have I done?
You can't even say that you really want to kill Loretta. You said that you want to kill her earlier.
When did I say that?
You're a liar. You're the one who said.
You
just
said.
The video showed a drunken Victoria and Blake arguing. In the video, Victoria goes on and on about Blake wanting to end Loretta's life. When Blake tries to deny it in the video, Victoria demands that he stop lying. Now, this video could be seen as drunken word vomit, but the detectives didn't think so. It was too specific. They weren't just talking about the weather, they were specifically talking about ending Loretta's life, and now she was missing for a week at this point. The whole thing it seemed too perfect. How often does a criminal get arrested only for evidence of their crime to be found right on their phone? Well, admittedly, probably more often than many of us realize, but this particular situation, it was just insane. The investigators decided to use this video as bait to crack Victoria, and luckily it worked. When Victoria was shown the video, she couldn't keep the facade up anymore, and she admitted to something really dark. She confessed to the police that Blake had suffocated Loretta in her own apartment on February 13th, subsequently taking her life. The interrogation room was silent after Victoria's confession. What the investigators and everyone was dreading came through. It was also confirmed that that heavy hockey bag didn't contain any sports gear. As we all feared, Loretta was inside that bag. But the thing was, according to Victoria, Loretta was still inside that bag. This meant that now police had to find it. For this, they also took help from Victoria, and she finally revealed the location where the two had dumped that bag. Victoria led the investigators to the Trans-Canada Highway near Salisbury, New Brunswick, in Canada. and on the side of the road, the police discovered the discarded hockey bag. The same hockey bag that was carried by Blake in the footage. When the officers opened the bag, sure enough, Loretta was inside. As they examined the state of her body, the details that Victoria had shared with the investigators turned out to be true. Someone had used their bare hands to end Loretta's life. The missing person search for Loretta was brought to a tragic end. But now, police still had to gather enough evidence to convict the couple for what they had done. And as we all know, this is often much easier said than done. Even though Victoria sort of admitted to being involved with Blake in Loretta's murder, the couple surprisingly pleaded not guilty. A judge announced that they'd be tried together in Loretta's murder trial. But before the trial began, both Blake and Victoria changed their pleas to guilty. They knew that the jig was up, and they both decided to confess. According to Blake and Victoria, Loretta arrived at her apartment at 11 a.m. and had no plans on leaving until she got what she was owed from Victoria and Blake. According to the couple, they owed Victoria somewhere between $400 and $600, but they had no plans to pay her. Why? Well, I seriously don't know. Sometimes tenants run into hard times and just don't have the money. But these guys, from the sound of it, just didn't want to pay for whatever reason. So Blake and Victoria decided that they would rather do the unthinkable than pay Loretta, which is just insane. To think that Loretta lost her life for rightfully asking for money from her tenants is absolutely harrowing. This could not have possibly gone worse, and it's literally every renter's worst nightmare come to life. But according to the couple, while Loretta was sitting in a chair, Blake came up behind her, and that was when the struggle started. Loretta fought with everything in her. Despite her small size, Loretta put up one heck of a fight, but unfortunately, Blake gained the upper hand, and in a cruel turn of events, he ended Loretta's life using plastic bags as well as his bare hands. Blake then loaded Loretta's body into a large hockey bag, and then put the bag in none other than Loretta's own car. This was a devastating and horrifying moment for everyone, because if you remember, the police were going through CCTV footage and trying to track the car's movement. All this time, while Blake and Victoria were buying things at stores and Tim Hortons with Loretta's cards, Loretta was in the trunk of that car, lifeless and cold. This footage, in hindsight, is just chilling. These despicable outlaws had the nerve to not pay Loretta what she was owed, end her life, spend her money, drive her car to Harrow, and even pretend to be Loretta, texting her family and asking for sensitive bank security details. The weird texts Yalchin received were obviously not Loretta's doing. It was all Victoria and Blake's plan to hide their awful crime while trying to get their dirty hands on Loretta's money, who had since lost her life. Everything about this case is just infuriating and extremely sad. In the end, Blake Leggett was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole for 25 years, whereas Victoria Henbury was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole for 10 years for second-degree murder. Now, when you hear these sentences, you might think, well, okay, so justice was served. But you have to remember, Loretta was pregnant. So these disgusting people took not just one life, but two. And one of them is only being forced to spend 10 years behind bars before she'll be eligible for release. And this is sickening. Loretta will never get a chance to meet her baby, finish her thesis that she was so passionate about, or start a life with Yalchin. Victoria and Blake took everything from Loretta, all because they didn't want to pay her a few $100s. It's tragedy on top of tragedy. Loretta, just like the women she was researching for her thesis, was an Indigenous woman. Because of her Inuk heritage, her investigation was put on the back burner. Even though the Halifax police were stealthy in the beginning, when they eventually found out that Loretta was Inuk, the investigation all of a sudden suddenly slowed down in pace. Another heartbreaking yet infuriating aspect of Loretta's case was the treatment the family received, all because of their heritage. See, after Loretta's tragic end, her family was offered counseling on dealing with grief. According to Loretta's sister, Delilah, the court-appointed grief counselor made her feel uncomfortable and even tried making passes at her. This is literally the last thing any grieving woman wants to go through, but this is a recurring trend for these women. I don't know what it is with people, but the second they find out someone is a person who they deem to be a second-class citizen, it's like all respect goes out the window, and they're treated like toys or animals. If you thought this was bad enough, well, Victoria, the accomplice in Loretta's murder, also made a comeback in a very infuriating way. See, she claimed that she also had indigenous ancestors on her mom's side, and that she deserved sympathy too. Loretta's family was taken aback by Victoria's behavior. All she was trying to do was save herself and reach out to several indigenous women's welfare centers to try to get her out of prison because she was, quote, indigenous too. Well, Victoria's little plan soon turned to dust when everyone turned their backs on her. The public hated her even more, and she was banned from ever accessing indigenous services again, and thankfully so. She also applied to withdraw her guilty plea in 2017, but it was eventually denied, so there's that. But as a result of Loretta's passing, a campaign was born called #MINext. It was started in 2014, and it was actually Loretta's cousin, Holly Jarrett, who started this project to raise the victim's family's voice following Loretta's abrupt and senseless passing. This campaign led to a domino effect, and it subsequently opened up an inquiry into the murdered and missing indigenous women and girls in 2015. The inquiry officially began in 2017 and lasted about 2 years, in which close to 3,000 people related to the MMIWG were interviewed. The final report was released in 2019. It contained over 200 calls for justice directed at governments, institutions, social service providers, industries, and all Canadians. Loretta's dream, even after her passing, had come true. She made a difference in all of these women's cases. Delilah also started a blog called A Homicide Survivor's Journey Through Grief and became a social justice activist, taking her late sister's legacy forward and spreading the word about MMIWG in schools, public events, and other platforms. Loretta's thesis professor, Dr. Daryl Leroux, as well as the Community Foundation of Nova Scotia, helped to set up the Loretta Saunders Community Scholarship in 2014 as a way to honor and remember Loretta and what she did in her life. Loretta's murder was extremely hard on her family, as well as on the community. And it also showed the double standards of law enforcement agencies in how they handled Loretta's case. I just hope that as time passes by, Loretta's case will continue to raise awareness about the injustice that so many Indigenous women face in places like Canada and across the world for that matter. It's so incredibly heartbreaking that in trying to raise awareness for the cause, Loretta herself became yet another victim. Nathan Trapuzzano woke up every day at 5 a.m. to go for a jog. He'd usually be back by 6 a.m., but this day was different. His pregnant wife Jennifer woke up at about 7 a.m. on April 1st, 2014, but Nathan was nowhere to be found, and this was very unlike him. He was a very schedule-oriented person, and would always let Jen know if he planned to be out late. So where was he? Something hollow and dreadful was growing in Jennifer's gut. She could sense that something was terribly wrong. Call it a sixth sense, pregnancy instinct, or a wife's intuition, but she grabbed her coat and went out to look for Nathan, partly to calm her own nerves, but partly hoping to run into him on the road. She was expecting Nathan to appear out of a corner any second, with his signature smile and apologies on his tongue for being late. But what Jennifer didn't expect to see were police cars and yellow crime scene tape. Welcome to True Crime Stories. If you're new here, I'm your host, Ty Knotts, and I post new true crime documentaries every single week. So if you're into that kind of thing, and let's be honest, if you're watching this video, you probably are, be sure to hit that subscribe button. It doesn't cost anything, and it just keeps you up to date with all my future videos. Nathan Trapuzzano was the fourth of 5 children born and raised in Sewickley, Pennsylvania. Nathan was defined as an all-around great guy who loved music of any kind. As long as it had a good beat, it was Nathan's favorite. Nathan was known for being a calm, level-headed, and just decent guy all around. After graduating high school, Nathan wanted to go down the path of becoming an actuary, financial analyst, or something along those lines. But he realized that he loved classical arts more. Latin, Greek, and other languages and cultures consumed Nathan's mind, and that's what he chose in the end. Nathan attended Ball State University and studied Latin, Greek, and classical studies, and he graduated in 2011. This was the place where he met his future wife, Jennifer. Jennifer and Nathan had a lot in common, so they quickly connected and their relationship blossomed into something permanent. They were both devout Christians, and Jennifer was at Ball State University studying to become a nurse. Nathan and Jennifer were very young, but they knew that they had found their forever person. So in May of 2013, the couple got married, and things were just getting better and better for them, especially when Jennifer found out she was pregnant. Nathan and Jennifer soon found out that they were going to be having a girl, and they picked the perfect name for her, Cecilia Marie. Nathan and Jennifer, right after their marriage, moved to Indianapolis, Indiana, where Nathan got a job as a computer programmer at Ivy Tech Community College. This was yet another quality of Nathan's. He was extremely skilled and didn't shy away from learning anything new, so the couple settled down permanently in Indiana, and Nathan was counting down the days until he could finally meet his daughter. But unfortunately, being a father wasn't in the cards for Nathan. Not because he didn't want it, but because someone would steal that opportunity away from him and leave a trail of terror in their wake. April 1st of 2014 was a normal day for 24-year-old Nathan. He had a routine of waking up early in the morning, grabbing his running shoes and going for a walk in the neighborhood. Nathan was a regular walker or runner, so whenever he passed by shops or even houses on his route, he'd stop and wave at everybody. And the same thing happened on April 1st. He took his usual route, but this time he wouldn't make it back home. Back at home, Jennifer woke up at around 7 a.m. and realized that Nathan still hadn't returned from his walk. He usually went for a walk or a run at about 5 a.m., and the walk would be about an hour long, so where was he? Well, Jennifer began to worry a lot because this wasn't normal at all. So she got up, left the house, and took the same route Nathan took every single day. But nothing could have prepared Jennifer for what lay ahead, and how a seemingly normal day in April of 2014 would change everything for the worse. In the meantime, 911 received a call a little before 6 a.m. that same day. It was a woman who'd seen a man collapse to the ground, clutching his midsection and screaming for help. As soon as the woman hung up the phone, she went outside and was horrified by the scene in front of her. A young man, probably in his 20s, had a single wound to his stomach, and he was shirtless. He was conscious, but visibly in shock. The shirt was later found just a few steps away from the wounded man. The emergency services arrived in record time, and even then the man was fortunately alive. But it seemed like from that point on, his condition had started to worsen. He was slowly slipping in and out of consciousness. His wound was severe, and he was rushed to a nearby hospital while police began taping off the area with crime scene tape. But within minutes of arriving at the hospital and getting wheeled in for emergency surgery, the man tragically wouldn't make it. He passed away at 7:40 a.m. Speaking of the time, Nathan's heavily pregnant wife, Jennifer, was walking down the road trying to keep her breathing in check. She was so worried about Nathan, and a mixture of fear and anxiety was eating away at her from the inside. Well, as soon as she reached the end of the road, she saw the police cars and the crime tape. Jennifer's head and world were spinning out of control. When she approached the police officers and asked them what had happened, she was given the rundown. A young man who was on a walk was attacked by an armed assailant. Jennifer was unable to breathe because everything sounded eerily similar. So she quickly pulled out her phone and showed the police pictures of her husband, Nathan. Now, it was the police's turn to be shell-shocked. They were looking at pictures of the same man who'd just been attacked and taken away in the ambulance for emergency surgery. That's when the police got to know the identity of the man. He was 24-year-old Nathan Trapuzzano. This was also the moment when Jennifer was struck with the horrible news that her husband was not in great condition. But it seemed like Jennifer was in for a painful ride because at 7:40 a.m., when the police got to know that the young man hadn't made it, they broke this terrible news to Jennifer, whose world shattered right then and there. Nathan, who was so excited to become a father and was just weeks away from meeting Cecilia, was now tragically gone. The police were stumped. Why would a defenseless man be attacked like that, and how? Luckily, the police were able to talk to a couple of shops and houses nearby, and they happened to have surveillance cameras pointed right at the place where Nathan was attacked. So this was as good a place as any for police to look into the incident. A tire shop owner, who knew Nathan well and saw him walk and run down the same path every single day, let the police see the CCTV footage, and it was both fortunate and unfortunate for the police and everyone. Fortunate because they had been able to see how Nathan was attacked, but unfortunate because, tragically, this camera caught everything. How Nathan was approached by the armed assailant and how he was subdued and attacked. It's so chilling to think that a surveillance camera caught Nathan's final, painful, and devastating moments. The footage showed Nathan walking down the route that he normally took, but unbeknownst to him, he was being followed by someone. At first, the person behind Nathan was also seen walking, but later he sprinted towards Nathan and subdued him with a firearm. A complying Nathan was backed into a corner while the assailant, most likely a robber, was pointing a .40 caliber firearm at him. At one point, Nathan was seen raising his hands and even taking off his shirt and shoes for reasons that we don't know. What was so bizarre was that a while later, while Nathan still had his hands up, another man could be seen behind the armed robber. The police suspected him to be an accomplice, a lookout guy, if you will. Seconds later, the armed man turned impatient and aggressive, and he fired a single round, causing Nathan to collapse to the ground, and the two mysterious men just ran away, out of frame and probably towards the main road. This was such a terrifying clip, even for the police to see, and from the looks of it, the incident looked like a robbery gone wrong. See, Nathan always left his valuables, like his phone and wallet, at home because he went on walks early in the morning and even evenings, so it was better to be safe than sorry. The police believed that the armed robber approached Nathan and tried to rob him, but when he found out that he didn't have anything on him, he was attacked and the perpetrator made a run for it. The police also believed it could have been a botched robbery. Maybe the robber didn't mean to shoot, and he was also scared and on edge and pulled the trigger in that very state. Another theory the police had was a possible gang initiation. A lot of sketchy gangs have this really inhumane ritual of sorts in which new members have to prove themselves by either stealing something or attacking someone. But no matter how many theories anyone had, the police had to catch this robber turned murderer. Even though the footage was helpful, it was still dark and grainy, and besides the clothing the armed assailant was wearing, which was pretty basic to begin with, the police had very few leads. They also couldn't figure out who the second person was. All the police could do was analyze the surveillance video, ask people around, and hopefully, before long, find some sort of evidence. At this point, a week had passed since Nathan's attack, and the police were looking into more firearm attacks in the area. Unfortunately, Indianapolis was plagued by several firearm attacks in the last couple of months, so trying to find Nathan's attacker was like finding a needle in a haystack. But days later, on April 8th, the police got to know about another firearm attack, and this time, the person taken to the hospital was a 16-year-old Simeon Adams, who went by the nickname of Red. He had a serious wound on his neck. While Simeon was in surgery, the police talked to people who knew him and found out how he got injured in the first place. Was he another victim like Nathan? And if so, then who was the armed loon on the loose? Well, the police talked to the person who attacked Simeon. His name was Eric, and what he told the police turned the case completely on its head. According to Eric, he'd been minding his own business when Simeon just attacked him out of the blue. Not once, not twice, but 3 times. This caused Eric to attack Simeon in self-defense, finally causing the vicious brawl to stop. But what the police found weird and unsettling was the fact that this attack had taken place not long after Nathan's attack, so things were looking very suspicious. But following this conversation with Eric, the police went ahead and looked into the 16-year-old wounded boy himself, and what they found was truly appalling. It turned out that Simeon was a prime suspect in a robbery that had taken place in March of that same year, so literally a week before the attack on Nathan. Simeon and his minions had broken into a firearms shop and managed to steal several firearms. If that wasn't enough, Simeon also tried to steal a car outside of a club on April 1st, just a couple of hours before the attack on Nathan. But he was unsuccessful because he was caught by a bouncer and forced to leave. To make matters worse, the club was close to the area where Nathan was attacked at around 6 a.m. Worse yet, the shell casings found in the firearms shop, as well as near Nathan's body, were a match. Now, they just had to find the weapon itself. So the pieces finally started to fall into place. Simeon went from being a victim of a vicious armed criminal, as initially thought by the police, to a full-on person of interest, or should I say prime suspect, in Nathan's attack. The police had to talk to Simeon about what he knew about Nathan and whether he attacked him or not. But that wasn't going to be easy. Simeon was still in surgery and his condition was critical. The police had their fingers crossed because they needed Simeon to pull through so that he could answer some vital questions. Questions that could help solve Nathan's bizarre and senseless attack and subsequent passing. So while the police were waiting for Simeon to gain consciousness, they dug some more. They talked to Simeon's friends and even family, and it was safe to say that this 16-year-old was a menace. He'd been involved in a lot of petty crimes, and paired with a firearm, he was a dangerous person, one you wouldn't want to cross paths with. Simeon's cousin eventually came forward to the police with some information, and that really hit the nail on the head. When Simeon's cousin was shown the surveillance footage, he immediately identified Simeon as the person walking and then sprinting towards Nathan on his morning walk. As for the person behind Simeon, seemingly on the lookout, he was also identified. He was a friend of Simeon's, also a teenager, and now the police were certain that Simeon was definitely the one who launched this attack on Nathan that resulted in him losing his life and leaving his wife, unborn child, and his family behind, battling with unbearable grief. What was so infuriating was the way that Simeon attacked Nathan. The cousin went on to explain how Simeon subdued Nathan, and he said that Simeon saw Nathan walking down the road and ordered him to stop. He then cornered him into an area and told Nathan to take off his clothes. Once he did and Nathan's hands were up in the air, Simeon pulled the trigger. No explanation, no persuasion, no altercation. It was just a spur-of-the-moment decision for Simeon to end an innocent person's life, a practical stranger's life, without any reason at all. The police also talked to another man who said that Simeon woke up early in the morning on April 1st and told him that the police were looking for him. When this man asked Simeon what he did, Simeon went on to explain that he got into a physical altercation with someone. One thing led to another, and he fired a single round at the man. Now, this is all a lie, as you might have known by now. Nathan was a complying victim. He never once tried to get into a fight with Simeon. He did exactly as he was told to do, and even then he still tragically lost his life. So the police had everything they wanted, and with luck on the police's side, Simeon had finally pulled through the surgery. Why is it that the bad guys often make it out of these death-defying situations, but innocent people like Nathan, who literally had no fault, lose their lives? But anyway, the police presented all of this evidence pinning Simeon and his acquaintance at the crime scene. And for once, Simeon couldn't defend himself. He was immediately arrested and charged with the murder of Nathan Trapuzzano, and he was put in custody. He was also charged with armed robbery and carrying a firearm without a license. Simeon's firearm also matched the same .40 caliber weapon used in both the firearm robbery and Nathan's attack. So Simeon here was trapped, and there was nowhere to run. While building the case against Simeon, the police were finding more and more disturbing things about this teen. First of all, he had several run-ins with the law, and he was actually on probation. He'd racked up 26 juvenile charges in the last 6 years alone. If you do the math, Simeon was an outlaw by the age of 10. Even saying this out loud is mind-boggling. His probation officer was also a piece of work, who didn't see anything wrong with Simeon not being present for most of his meetings. Moreover, Simeon was also due to attend a court hearing on 13 probation violations, but he never showed up. Simeon was out in the streets, free to do whatever he wanted. What was even more alarming was the fact that Simeon had actually attacked another innocent man sometime before Nathan's attack. It was March 30th, just 2 days before Nathan's attack, that Simeon had bumped into a random man while passing him by on the street, and it was a pretty innocent situation. Well, Simeon glared at the man, who was the owner of a steak and lemonade shop, and then, totally out of the blue, fired a single round at him. It seems to me that attacking people for no apparent reason is just Simeon's MO. The man was injured, but luckily he did survive. Simeon was to be tried as an adult, but since he was 16 when he attacked Nathan, the prosecution was in for a ride. The state knew that getting a life in prison sentence was going to be nearly impossible, but they were going to fight to the end to get the maximum and harshest sentence possible. And so Simeon's trial began. Even though what he had done angered everyone to the depths of their core, his behavior going in and out of court irked everyone even more so. He was smiling and laughing while being escorted to and from court as if he hadn't just committed the murder of an innocent man. The prosecution presented their arguments and why he should be given the harshest sentence. He took an innocent person's life without any reason at all, and simply for the heck of it. Their star witness was none other than Simeon's friend, who was with him at the time of Nathan's attack. The prosecution decided not to charge the lookout boy, aka Simeon's friend, and used his testimony to prosecute Simeon. The defense, on the other hand, played the troubled childhood card. See, Simeon had lost his mom to a tragic drowning accident when he was just a year old, and his dad was behind bars more than he was home. So the defense argued that Simeon was just misunderstood and troubled. Now, I'm sorry for what Simeon went through as a kid, but having a troubled childhood doesn't give anyone the right to murder innocent people. Well, in the end, Simeon was found guilty and sentenced to 55 years in prison, which is not nearly enough if you ask me. He was also sentenced to a consecutive 12-year sentence for the attack on the Steak and Lemonade owner. Also, remember Simeon's probation officer, who really just wasn't good at his job? Well, he resigned shortly after everything went down with Nathan's attack. And if you ask me, he should have been reprimanded as well, but he got off scot-free. A few weeks after Nathan's sudden attack and passing, Jennifer brought tiny Cecilia Marie into the world. When everyone saw the baby girl, they were taken aback at how much she looked like Nathan. Everyone was over the moon over this pint-sized addition to the family. But the fact that Nathan wasn't there to hold his daughter, the one he was so excited to meet and raise and love, it was tearing at everyone's hearts. The community was also there for Jennifer and her baby. A GoFundMe was set up for funeral expenses and to support Nathan's family, including Jennifer and Cecilia. Jennifer also went on to get a PhD, and she's now a physician's assistant. Jennifer still wears her husband's wedding band around her neck as a necklace, and she never takes it off, and it reminds her that no matter how hard life can get, a part of Nathan is still there cheering her on, as he always did when he was alive. Now, she has a daughter who's the only living and breathing memory of her husband, and she loves Cecilia to pieces. What's so amazing about Jennifer is that she's still so graceful towards her husband's murderer. She's already forgiven that vile man for taking her husband away from her family. And all because she didn't want to consume all of her time and energy on resenting and hating someone so unimportant. She had so much grace, and it's unbelievable. Nathan's workplace, Ivy Tech Community College, also granted baby Cecilia a scholarship for her future studies. So even though Nathan wasn't around to help raise the funds to send his daughter to college, his coworkers happily stepped in to take his place. The Trapuzzano family also set up the Nathan Trapuzzano Memorial Fund, which holds an annual walk for Nathan and several fundraising events to help children who have lost their parents. The fact that Cecilia will never get to meet her dad and experience all the things girls do with their dads is heartbreaking. Nathan would have been a wonderful dad, and I'm sure Cecilia would have been a daddy's girl all the way. But at the end of the day, I think it's best to just focus on how heartwarming it is to see how far this community was willing to go to ensure that both Jennifer and Cecilia continue to feel the love and warmth that Nathan would have provided if only he were still here. The power of this strong little community is truly inspirational. After graduating high school early, Kiely Rodni headed off to a celebration with friends in the Tahoe National Forest. In the early morning hours of August 6th, 2022, investigators say she left a campground party and was never seen again. Kiely was smart and talented, with a loving family and lots of friends. She was looking forward to starting college in the next few weeks and was happy to spend some time with her friends before saying her goodbyes. No one knew that some simple fun at a campground, so close to home, could end so badly. Locals and law enforcement alike showed up in strong numbers to locate Kiely, but no one could be prepared for what they found. Friday, August 5th, 2022, was a beautiful day in the Tahoe National Forest, hosting clear views of Mount Shasta in the distance. Wildflowers were blooming, following the wildfires of summers past, dotting the landscape with purple and yellow hues. Summertime was ending, and people were squeezing in the last few days of seasonal fun before heading back to school. Kiely Rodni had just graduated high school early and with honors, and that's no easy feat. She was due to attend Sierra College in the coming weeks, and her family couldn't have been more proud. On Friday, August 5th, she spent time with her friends making creme brulee, and later she had plans to take part in a summer send-off party at Prosser Campground, which is about a 45-minute drive from Reno, not far from the state line, but it was only about 15 minutes from Kiely's home. Prosser Campground is located on a large reservoir and is commonly known to locals as the Sanctuary. This was the perfect place for friends to have one last hurrah before going off to college for new adventures. The following morning, around 9 a.m. on August 6th, Kiely had made plans to meet her closest friends, but she never showed. It would turn out that Friday, August 5th, is the last day anyone saw Kiely. Kiely was born and raised in Truckee, California. Her parents, Lindsay and Daniel, were loving and dedicated parents. She also had an 8-year-old brother who thought that she was the best person on earth. Kiely and her family lived in a more rural area of Truckee, and some would describe it as more off-grid, although many locals in the mountain towns of California live this way. For Kiely, this was just her ordinary way of life. She was known for being a very happy person, so it was clear that her more off-grid lifestyle was panning out great for her. As the weekend finally rolled around, Kiely couldn't have been more excited to attend the campground party with her friends. At around 6 p.m. on the 5th of August, Kiely set out towards the party, with their parents never realizing they would never see their daughter again. Shortly after 6 p.m. on the 5th, Kiely goes into a gas station in Truckee, about halfway between her home and the party's location, where surveillance cameras captured footage of her browsing the store. A couple hours later, close to 10 p.m., Kiely arrives at the campground with her friend Magdalene, and she then links up with another friend, Sammy Smith. Sammy and Kiely spend most of their time at the party together, sharing drinks and breaking off briefly to chat with others. While this was supposed to be a tight-knit gathering of local teens, word about this campground party traveled fast, and soon people from all over Northern California were making their way to Prosser to attend. Reports state that anywhere from 200 to 300 people were in attendance that night. Due to the tendency for wildfires in this area, the partygoers could not light a bonfire, meaning that unless there were other sources of light, the area was pitch black. It's been said that many people used glow sticks, electric lanterns, and their headlights to illuminate the area. Kiely and her group of friends had, of course, attended parties like this before. Kiely's mom trusted her daughter and had told news outlets that she never, ever drank and drove. Kiely was both smarter than that and incredibly responsible. Kiely's friends have backed up this statement, saying they never saw Kiely drink at a party and then drive afterward. Thus, Lindsay had no qualms about letting Kiely attend. At around 11 p.m., the girls walked to Kiely's silver Honda CR-V to charge Kiely's phone. They sat there and talked for some time, sharing a few drinks, and part of the conversation included Sammy asking for a ride home that evening. At around 11:30 p.m., Lindsay says she received a text from Kiely, saying she was about to leave the party and was headed straight home. Lindsay, who'd witnessed Kiely's hard work to graduate early with honors, trusted her daughter to be home when she said she would be there. She had no doubt in her mind that Kiely would be home shortly. Lindsay texted her back, telling Kiely to be safe and that she loved her. Kiely's response was, "Okay, I love you too." Between 11:30 p.m. and 12:20 a.m., Sammy decides that Kiely is too intoxicated to drive her home and arranges for another ride. The two girls parted ways, Sammy telling authorities that she said her goodbyes with Kiely at about 12:25 a.m. Minutes later, at 12:36, Sammy explained that she received another call from Kiely inquiring about her ride. Sammy says she could hear talking in the background, so she believed Kiely to still be at the party, but she couldn't be sure. Unbeknownst to Sammy, this would be the last time anyone spoke to Kiely.
Kiely?
Lindsay woke up the next morning to discover that Kiely was not in her room and that her vehicle was not parked outside. After she'd been unable to get a hold of her after a few calls, she instantly phoned the police and reported that Kiely was missing. But the police didn't issue an Amber Alert immediately. They said that there was no evidence that Kiely had been abducted. They went to the area where the party was held to conduct a search and interviewed about 1/3 of the partygoers. Investigators urged more people who attended the party to come forward, but many of the attendees were skeptical about speaking with authorities. Most of them were about to start college and were fearful that the repercussions from their activities at the party would ruin their future in some way. The police were vocal about the fact that no one would be in any trouble for things that happened at the party. They just wanted to find Kiely. But this wasn't enough to sway the minds of the partygoers. Most of them remained tight-lipped.
I can't.
Word traveled fast about Kiely's disappearance, but despite there being over 200 people in attendance, no one reported seeing anything.
Is that Kiely?
Yet both Kiely and her vehicle were missing. How is this possible? Surely someone would have seen something. Sammy decided to host a meeting with everyone who attended the party that night. No detectives were allowed at this meeting, in hopes that speaking with peers and friends would put them more at ease. But still, nothing new came from it. Sammy told authorities several times that she was the last person to see Kiely. Sammy and other girlfriends of Kiely were vocal about the pushy older guys that were creeping them out at the party. And this is when Sammy and the other friends decided to leave. This caused many people to raise their eyebrows. Why would a group of girlfriends leave one friend behind if they knew that she'd been drinking and that there were older men in attendance who were making these young girls feel uneasy? Even though Sammy reported that there were hundreds of photos and videos from that night, not a single one gave any evidence to Kiely's state of mind or whereabouts. Police were simply at a loss. Finally, days after Kiely's initial disappearance, investigators were able to confirm the last time her phone connected to cellular data was at 12:33 a.m., which would have been about the time she spoke with Sammy on the phone. So whatever happened just seconds after that call, well, it couldn't have been good. Police now had their first and only lead, and the search for Kiely was on. Sammy quickly became crucial to the investigation, having spent so much time with Kiely the night she disappeared, and she went on to do several media interviews. When asked about an interview about what she believed happened to her friend, Sammy says she thinks that, quote, somebody knew she was drunk, offered to give her a ride home, but didn't give her a ride home. Another initial theory is that she crashed somewhere along the way home. The area is mountainous, and the roads can be difficult to navigate, especially if you're an inexperienced driver who's been drinking and it's the middle of the night. For any of you who may not have ever driven through the mountains, let me just say, some of these mountain roads can be hard to navigate even in broad daylight. Adding drinks into the mix as well as the darkness of night, well, it's a recipe for disaster. Sammy Smith cooperated with the investigation, as did Kiely's reported ex-boyfriend, Jagger. But media interviews with Sammy and Jagger presented the public with discrepancies. Speculation circulated about the relationship between Kiely, Sammy, and Jagger. Many reported that Sammy and Kiely were not as close as Sammy had led the police to believe. At the time of her disappearance, Kiely and Sammy weren't even friends on social media, but internet sleuths discovered that Sammy and Jagger were. When Sammy and Jagger requested via social media that all in-person leads be directed to them instead of the authorities so that they could, quote, filter information, well, many started to get the feeling that something much more sinister had occurred. This, coupled with what many believed to be suspicious behavior, led to the belief that the girl claiming to be friends with Kiely may have had something to do with her disappearance. Following Jagger's public request that he be contacted with the leads, the Placer County Sheriff's Department released a statement via Twitter on August 11th, saying that they never instructed Jagger to collect witness testimony. They emphasized that all information be relayed directly to them. This only increased public suspicion around Jagger and Sammy. As photo and video footage from the party started surfacing, it was sent over to be reviewed by the authorities. By August 12, 2022, the search for Kiely intensified. Authorities and volunteers extensively searched her last known location as well as her home, looking for anything that might have led them to finding Kiely. In a town hall meeting the week after her disappearance, the Placer County Sheriff's Office outlined their extensive searches. Officials told news outlets that they'd searched as far north as Sierraville and as far east as Verde. To the south, they searched all around Truckee and extended beyond the Jackson Meadows Reservoir to the west, about a 25-mile radius from her last known location. People from the area volunteering in the search explained they didn't believe Kiely or her car was still in the Tahoe National Forest, which stretches over 800,000 miles. This is a vast and scenic area with a diverse landscape ranging from rugged peaks and dense forest to immaculate lakes and rivers. Kiely could have been anywhere, but the search team felt confident that if she was in that forest, they would have found her by now. Due to conflicting information about Kiely's relationships with Jagger, Sammy, and other partygoers, many were left thinking the worst, but hoping for the best. All the while, authorities continued to piece things together bit by bit. At a press conference on August 12th, law enforcement informed the public that they'd received reports from people inside the community that there was an adult dissuading people from coming forward, prompting officials to open a 100% anonymous online portal where people could submit photos, videos, and other information concerning Kiely's disappearance. By this point, the case was just getting downright bizarre. It seemed exceedingly clear that someone knew something, and they were going to every possible effort to make sure that this information didn't get out. By August 13th, law enforcement held another press conference where Public Information Officer Angela Musala explained that they had ramped up their search for the weekend. She explained that on August 12th, there was a potential burial site that was located near the campground that had been found by search and rescue ground teams in the area. She continued, saying that Kiely's family was notified, and the FBI responded to the scene, accompanied by the Placer and Nevada County Sheriff's offices, where upon further examination, they uncovered the remains of a dog. Angela went on to address the audience by saying, "Let me be clear. We have one team, one mission, and one goal, and that's to find Kiely Rodni." As the 9th day of the missing person investigation came to an end, the Placer County Sheriff's Office continued to follow up on 720 leads, looking for a single tip to lead them in the right direction. Meanwhile, people across the nation continued to speculate about what happened to Kiely, sitting on the edge of their seats waiting for the next clue. Occam's razor says that it's usually the simplest answer, but with an accident looking less and less likely with each passing day, what's the next simplest answer? What else could possibly cause someone to vanish without a trace from a crowded party? For a little over 2 weeks, Kiely's family had to go to sleep each night, not knowing where their precious daughter was, and her friends faced accusations from strangers all across the nation. And police worked tirelessly to find this missing girl. But then, a breakthrough. On August 21st, 2022, search and rescue YouTubers Adventures with Purpose pulled Kiely Rodni's silver CRV from the Prosser Reservoir. Adventures with Purpose is a YouTube channel that focuses primarily on cold cases. They specialize in underwater recoveries. When Kiely initially went missing, many familiar with their recoveries requested they join the search for the missing girl, and the team were happy to oblige. AWP states that a law enforcement agency reached out to them and asked for their help. Yet when they arrived, they were told that the lake had already been extensively searched with dive teams and there was nothing there. The search began in Prosser Reservoir at 10:40 a.m. on August 21st. They launched 2 sonar boats, one of which located an object at 11:15 a.m., 55 feet offshore and in only 14 feet of water, using a specialized Garmin sonar device. Nick, one of the divers, entered the water and confirmed the vehicle was the one belonging to Kiely Rodni by matching the license plate. A diver was sent down, and unfortunately, he found a body inside the cargo area of the vehicle. According to Adventures with Purpose, the Garmin EchoMap Ultra that they used to locate the vehicle cost around $2,500, a small investment for a police force of this size. It appears to be a solid investment for search and rescue teams. So if this technology is crucial for underwater searches, and a simple YouTube channel managed to purchase one, why are search and rescue teams in the area not using it? The FBI must have had the latest technology, so why were they unable to find the vehicle in the 2 weeks they helped local agencies in the search? After making the discovery, AWP made a Facebook post about the recovery mission. The team maintains that they reached out to law enforcement first, as they were working with them to locate Kiely. But at the press conference the following day, the spokesperson for the sheriff's department stated that AWP never reached out to them and that the police had to go out of their way to contact the team. Due to the amazing reputation of AWP, people have been skeptical about this information, with some believing that local law enforcement were just embarrassed by their oversight. The discovery of Kiely's vehicle was devastating to her family and the community. But even worse was when police made the haunting announcement: the body found in the back of the car was, unfortunately, Kiely. Most would assume that this would be the end of it, case closed. But things continued to get weirder from here, as people began to question local law enforcement about their efforts in finding Kiely. Doug and Nick of Adventures with Purpose stressed that they have a unique and rare skill set, and that aiding police agencies in this way is an honor. They acknowledged their support for law enforcement across the US, including the FBI. But as the news of the discovery surfaced, many people following the case began to wonder, how could the men from Adventures with Purpose do in less than 2 hours what several agencies, large and small, couldn't accomplish in 2 weeks? Adventures with Purpose discovered Kiely's vehicle upside down in an area that had been, quote, extensively searched by authorities. This led many to question the competence of local law enforcement, and rightfully so, especially since a trail camera in the area shows that at 12:32 a.m. on August 6th, a vehicle drove straight into the water where Kiely was found, and at the exact location where her cell phone last pinged. The local police department said that they'd spent over 15,000 man-hours searching for Kiely, only for another team to come in and find her in less than 2 hours, in the same spot where her phone last pinged. Aerial views of the location clearly show something in the water where they recovered her body. So if there were air searches conducted, how was this missed? If she drove her vehicle into the water, it should have driven through the sand. How were those tracks missed when her mom reported her missing the very next morning, less than 12 hours after she'd vanished? Doug Bishop from AWP went on to state in an interview that he found the circumstances extremely suspicious. He cites many of the things already discussed, that she was highly intelligent, on her way to college, and disappears from a large party only to be found a few hundred yards away. He explains that it isn't possible that Kiely went the wrong way down the road. He explains that this road was one way in and one way out, not to mention a road that she was very familiar with. Yet the road her vehicle ended up on had a very hard, sharp left turn onto a rough dirt road that requires four-wheel drive. Essentially, whether she was drunk or not, Kiely would have known immediately she wasn't going the right way, making her crash even more suspicious. Doug Bishop explains that where she was found within the vehicle, in the cargo compartment, was also suspicious, and that the whole thing just doesn't add up. The fact that no one is willing to talk is a huge red flag and adds to this suspicion. While this very well could be an accident, there are many inconsistencies in this story. Her friends stated that she seemed too drunk to drive and reported strange men at the party, but had no problem leaving her there alone. She clearly and coherently texted her mother, yet 30 minutes later was too inebriated to know that she was going the wrong way down a road that she'd traveled many times before. Law enforcement searched extensively, but couldn't locate a vehicle that was clearly seen from aerial cameras. It just doesn't add up. Bishop also says that it's suspicious that Kiely was located in the cargo area of the vehicle. He explains that had the windows been up, Kiely would have had the time to crawl back there. But why would she do that?
Why, Kiely?
Well, we don't know. But the thing is, when the vehicle was recovered, multiple windows were rolled down. This means the vehicle would have filled with water so quickly that she wouldn't have had time to maneuver back there. And why would she? She could so easily have maneuvered out the window to safety. The fact that she became stuck in the back of the car just makes no logical sense whatsoever. News reports claim that over 400 people pass away each year in their cars from being trapped in water. Your best chance of survival is to get out of the car before it's fully submerged. Most cars, when driven into the water, are fully submerged in less than a minute, so every second counts. Experts explain that your best bet is to get the windows down as soon as possible and escape through the front windows, not the rear. But in Kiely's case, this raises more questions. Kiely's driver window, along with the other windows, appeared to have been down when the vehicle was pulled from the water. Yet it's been reported that she was located in the backmost part of the vehicle. Furthermore, the driver's side mirror was broken off and there was a dent in the driver's side door. And neither of these appear to have been there when she left her home that evening. So where did this damage come from? Footage of several other vehicles that were recovered from the water show no damage to mirrors or doors. So what happened to Kiely's vehicle? If there were over 200 people in attendance, how did no one hear the vehicle go into the water? While there's so much that's still unknown, Kiely's autopsy report soon revealed the truth of this case. And it's a truth that many of us are unlikely to accept. The autopsy report was released on Thursday, October 13th, 2022, in which the cause of Kiely's passing was declared as an accident. The official report claims that she drowned. Locals find this conclusion surprising, to put it mildly. They cite suspicions due to the chief of police and the coroner being one and the same. They say that many crimes in the area are covered up or declared an accident because this is a tourist location, and having a reputation for crime would be bad for the local economy, and I second this notion. In fact, this is one of the main reasons my wife and I left our hometown. In the few months before we packed up and moved, we personally spotted firsthand 3 crime scenes where people had lost their lives. One beside an apartment complex, one in a ditch on the side of a major highway, and another where the location escapes me at the moment, but not one of these crimes was ever officially documented. They were all covered up because the town was a tourist destination. The money from tourism is what kept the city afloat, and they couldn't risk losing all that money. The autopsy report says that Kiely was fully dressed and there was no evidence of any assault. The toxicology report showed caffeine, nicotine, and a minuscule amount of THC were in Kiely's system. Liver tissue samples taken showed that there was an alcohol level in her system of 0.08, right at the legal limit to drive. But many experts claim that these ethanol levels in her system were likely the result of the decomposition process. This leaves people questioning if Kiely was drunk at all. Roads in the area are not lit with street lamps. They're winding dirt paths that aren't well marked. It is possible, despite Kiely having been to this area many times, she took a wrong turn and drove herself directly into the water. But if so, what prevented her from climbing out an already open window? The most interesting element of the autopsy report is that there was virtually no water in her lungs. A medical examiner explained that the lung weights were surprisingly low for a case of water inhalation. One would expect that if a person passed away from drowning, there would be a lot of water in their lungs, but there wasn't nearly enough to conclude such a thing. Detective Sunnier reported that because there was no evidence of foul play, the manner of her passing had to be listed as accidental. I don't know about you, but to me, this just means that the team didn't dig deep enough to find the evidence they needed. I mean, heck, they clearly have a track record for this. Her vehicle was found in a spot they claim to have searched multiple times. In the end, there's a hole in the lives of Kiely's friends and family that will never be filled. Worse yet, they've never even been able to find out for certain what happened to Kiely that day. And I don't know about you, but I wouldn't be able to let this situation rest until I had some proven answers. But despite this incredibly heavy loss, I just hope this serves as a remarkably valuable lesson to never leave a friend behind.
Bye, Kiely.
This tragedy could have been avoided, but from it, there are lessons to be learned. For law enforcement, for partygoers, and for the true crime community. Kiely didn't have to lose her life that night, but I sincerely hope that the story of her loss may, in some way, help prevent others from meeting the same fate.